My name is Arthur Miller, whose name has been changed. I am an old man who has lived for a long time in a small coastal town in Florida. My wife, Eleanor, whose name has been changed, and I are retired, living a peaceful life. Our house has a spacious rooftop terrace on the top floor. It is our favorite place every afternoon and evening. We often sit on the rooftop, watching the beautiful sunset over the sea, looking down at the neighborhood and the street below. From my rooftop, I can see a part of the neighborhood. Below are small houses, familiar asphalt roads, and the bustling flow of people and vehicles during rush hour. Among these sights, there is a special tree that catches my attention. It is a querindo palm tree, a type of slender, tall palm, which might resemble a coconut tree in some areas, standing alone at the edge of the road, a few houses away from mine. This tree is quite tall, standing out among other trees in the area. It is just a normal tree, but from above, it looks somewhat different, perhaps because of its isolated position. The sunset view from my rooftop is often very poetic. The late afternoon sunlight shines down, painting the entire neighborhood gold. One evening in late 2022, as Eleanor and I were sitting on the rooftop, watching the view, as usual, the clock showed around 7 p.m. The sun had set completely, but there was still some light. I looked down at the street below, watching the people walking by, the cars driving past, and then, I saw, up on that special querindo palm tree, a figure, a red figure. The red shadow on the leaves had appeared, and that was the beginning of our nightly haunting. On that evening, around 7 p.m., I saw a red figure on that special querindo palm tree. It was the figure of a woman. She was wearing a bright red dress, and she was sitting on the tree. I rubbed my eyes, looked again. Yes, she was sitting precariously on a branch or frond of that tree, at a quite high position. That was very strange. Why would a woman be sitting on a tree at this hour? She looked blurry, not very clear from a distance, but the red color of her dress stood out strangely. I called Eleanor. Eleanor, look, on that querindo palm tree. Eleanor looked in the direction I pointed. What is it, dear? Initially, Eleanor didn't see clearly. She only saw something blurry and red on the tree. I looked closer. Besides the figure of the woman, I also saw she was holding something in her arms. It looked like a baby. A woman in a red dress, holding a baby, sitting on a querindo palm tree at 7 p.m. That sight was very unusual. We sat there, staring at the red figure on the tree, full of confusion. We were on the high rooftop, so we could see the people walking below more clearly. Cars were still driving by on the road. People were still walking on the sidewalk. But none of them seemed to notice the red figure on the tree. They walked by normally, didn't look up, had no reaction whatsoever, as if only we could see her. The red figure lasted for a few minutes, then gradually disappeared into the darkness, or faded away. That night, Eleanor and I talked a lot about what we had seen. We tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a reflection of light? Maybe it was an illusion? But we both saw clearly a human figure, red, on the tree, holding a baby. And the more terrifying thing was, the next evening, right around 7 p.m., I saw it again. The red figure appeared again on that querindo palm tree, still sitting in the same position, still holding the baby. The hour of presence had become a terrifying rule. And we knew that what we saw wasn't an illusion. Something supernatural was happening there. The red shadow on the leaves was real. And it appeared every evening at 7 p.m. The regular appearance of the red figure on the kirindo palm tree every evening at 7 p.m. made Eleanor and me very puzzled and scared. We couldn't explain it. The people walking on the street below were still completely unaware. This increased the mystery and terror. As if we were witnessing something from another world. A world that only manifested at a specific hour each day. Curiosity and fear grew stronger. I decided I needed to see more clearly. I have an old pair of binoculars that I usually use to look at the sea or distant boats. The next evening, right around 7 p.m., when the red figure appeared again on the kirindo palm tree, I took out the binoculars. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the binoculars, pointing them towards the tree. Eleanor stood beside me, looking at me with worry. I raised the binoculars to my eyes, looking at the red figure. The image appeared much clearer. It was a young woman, wearing a bright red dress, which looked like it was made of old fabric. She was very thin, her face was abnormally pale, and her eyes. I shivered violently as I looked into those eyes through the binoculars. Deep black, hollow eyes, no pupils, just two dark, deep sockets, like two holes. Those eyes were looking straight at me. From the top of the tree, she was holding a baby in her arms. The baby also looked blurry, small, its face pressed against her shoulder, so I couldn't see it clearly. That girl in the red dress, she was swaying gently, swaying back and forth on the tree, as if sitting on an invisible swing. That sight was too terrifying. A pale face, hollow black eyes, swaying on the treetop, holding a baby. The binoculars of horrifying truth. They showed me a terrifying detail I didn't want to see. I lowered the binoculars, my hands shaking violently. Eleanor looked at me, her face full of fear. "What did you see?" Eleanor asked softly, her voice trembling. I couldn't speak, only my own gasping for breath. Eleanor took the binoculars from my hand. She also looked through them. After a moment, Eleanor put the binoculars down. Her face also turned pale. She looked at me, her eyes full of horror. "Oh, my God," Eleanor mumbled. What is that?" Hollow black eyes, a frozen smile on a pale face, a baby in her arms, swaying on the tree. We had no doubt anymore. That was a ghost, and it appeared every evening at 7 p.m. on that kirindo palm tree. While the flow of people and vehicles below was still bustling, no one seemed aware of what was happening high above. The red shadow on the leaves, now with terrifying details revealed through the binoculars, had become a real haunting. We sat there, on the rooftop, looking down at the street below, where the flow of people and vehicles was still bustling. It was exactly 7 p.m. On that kirindo palm tree. The ghost of the girl in the red dress was still sitting, holding the baby, swaying gently. We saw her clearly through the binoculars. A pale face, hollow black eyes. But the people walking below, they didn't see her. A woman was walking on the sidewalk, right under the tree. She was looking straight ahead, not looking up. She walked past without knowing that a terrifying ghost was sitting right above her head. A car drove by, windows open. People inside were talking, laughing. They didn't see her either. A group of teenagers rode bicycles past, chatting loudly. They also didn't pay attention to the tree. That sight was so strange and terrifying. Our world, the normal physical world, and the invisible world of the ghost were existing side by side. And only a few people, like us, could see the boundary between those two worlds. They don't see, they continue living their everyday lives, unaware of the hidden tragedy on that treetop. This made Eleanor and me feel isolated and scared. We were witnessing something horrifying, but couldn't share it with anyone, because no one would believe us. The fear didn't just come from seeing the ghost, but also from the isolation, from knowing that we were seeing a truth that others couldn't, or didn't want to, see. Every evening at 7 p.m., the hour of presence, we faced that sight again. The ghost of the girl in the red dress holding a baby. Sitting on the tree, swaying, her hollow black eyes seemed to become clearer each time, as if she knew we were watching. The invisible world amidst everyday life. It exists, right on the familiar street of our neighborhood. And only we are the witnesses. The fear constantly grew. 7 p.m. every day was a moment of tension. Would she be different today? Would she leave the tree? And what would happen if she looked straight up at our rooftop? With those hollow black eyes? The haunting by the ghost of the girl in the red dress holding a baby on the Kirindo palm tree every evening at 7 p.m. clung to us. We lived in worry and fear, especially as 7 p.m. approached. The fact that only we saw her, while others were completely unaware, increased the terror and mystery. We knew we had to find out about that special tree, about that area on the road below. There must be a reason why this spirit is bound to that place and appears at such a fixed time. I started searching for information, asking the oldest neighbors in the neighborhood, searching on local history websites, sifting through old town news archives. The search was difficult. Old stories are often forgotten. But we persisted, because fear urged us to know the truth. Gradually, pieces of the story began to emerge. There were vague rumors, stories passed down through generations, about a tragedy that happened in this area many years ago. Truth from the past. About 20 years ago, within the time frame you requested, a very terrifying incident occurred involving that very Kirindo palm tree, or the area right at the base of the tree. There was a story about a young woman and her small child. Their lives were very difficult. That woman had endured ultimate tragedies. Then, one evening, around 7 p.m., a horrifying tragedy happened. There are two rumored versions of the story. One says that the woman, in despair, climbed that Kirindo palm tree with her child and took her own life and the baby's life by jumping down. The other version says that she and the baby were victims of a brutal murder that happened right at the base of the tree. And the killer left the bodies or something on the tree to dispose of evidence or leave a message. Regardless of the version, the result was the tragic death of the woman and the baby right at the location of that tree. Around 7 p.m., the tragic history of the tree. The truth from the past has been revealed. The spirits of the girl in the red dress and the baby. They are bound to the place where they died tragically. And perhaps, they are reliving the last moments of their lives. Or seeking justice. Or simply trapped, unable to find peace. This horrifying truth explained everything. Why they appeared on that tree. Why it was always at 7 p.m. Why her face was full of suffering and her eyes were empty. We sat on the rooftop, looking down at the tree. Fear mixed with deep pity. We weren't just simply seeing ghosts. We were seeing the traces of an old tragedy. A bloody tragedy. And that tragedy is still relived every evening at 7 p.m. on that Kirindo palm tree. The truth about the tragedy of the girl in the red dress and the baby made our haunting deeper and more terrifying than ever. We no longer looked at the Kirindo palm tree the same way. It was a grave, a living monument to a bloody tragedy. Every evening, when the clock struck 7, my heart beat faster. I knew they would appear. The ghost of the girl in the red dress holding a baby. Sitting on the tree, swaying, the 7 p.m. haunting. Even though we tried to avoid looking, the truth is they were still there. And sometimes, we couldn't resist looking down. Through the binoculars, the image was still clear, a pale face. Hollow black eyes. A baby in her arms. And the most terrifying thing was, sometimes, I felt as if those hollow black eyes were no longer just looking straight ahead. As if they knew we were on the rooftop. Looking down, as if they were looking straight at us. Their coldness, sadness, and anger seemed to radiate. We lived in constant worry. Knowing about the tragedy, seeing the trapped spirits, it changed our lives. The people walking below were still unaware. They continued living their normal lives, not seeing the invisible world existing right above their heads. They are still there, the girl in the red dress and the baby on the tree. Forever bound to the place where the tragedy happened. I don't know if their spirits will ever find peace. I hope that one day, their suffering will end, but as long as they keep appearing every evening at 7 p.m. on that tree, we know they are still trapped. The haunting from our rooftop, looking down at the peaceful country road, has become a constant reminder of hidden tragedies, of spirits unable to find peace. The 7 p.m. haunting will never leave, and we, Arthur and Eleanor, are the witnesses to their painful existence. Our story is a warning. Be careful with seemingly peaceful and familiar places. You never know what tragedy has happened there, and what spirit is still trapped, waiting to be seen. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, or stories based on accounts and unexplained mysteries, like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the channel to follow our latest videos. We will bring you more terrifying and haunting stories. Thank you for listening.